Hi everyone, welcome to this Gamifiers meetup where we're going to be interviewing Lee Sheldon, author, and many more. In fact, I'm going to read out the description on the back of his book because it's really quite something. Lee began his writing career in television as a writer-producer, eventually writing more than 200 scripts, ranging from Charlie's Angels to Edge of Night to Star Trek: The Next Generation, as a writer-producer as well. Having written and designed more than 40 commercial and applied video games, Lee has been spearheading the first full writing for games concentration in North America, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and the second writing concentration at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. He's a regular lecturer and consultant on game design and writing in the United States and abroad. His most recent commercial game, the award-winning The Lion Song, is currently on Steam. For the past 2 years, he consulted on an escape room in a box funded by NASA that gives visitors to hundreds of science museums and planetariums the opportunity to play colonizers on the moon. And he's currently writing his second mystery novel. Lee, welcome. Did I miss anything there?
No, that was pretty good. Thank you.
Do you know what? I'm actually going to start off by asking, can you tell us a bit more about your latest mystery novel?
No. Well, it's all right. I'll give you a hint. It's set in the late 1700s in Bavaria.
Oh, brilliant. I like that. Now, the reason I ask is because obviously a lot of what you talk about in your excellent books, which this is the multiplayer classroom game plans, is that you really go to town on story and narrative. And I was wondering how important to you is the story to any game or gamification project?
I think I think there's probably, there are things that you can teach without using story. But I use story to be sneaky so that the people who are experiencing it get involved in the way they would in a regular story, a regular game that doesn't try to teach anything. And so once they're involved, and I use this phrase a lot, once they want to know what happens next, I've got them, and I can teach them anything I want, and because they're not going to go away. The idea of the students who tune out and just sit there and come to class and everything like that, there'll always be some of those, but for the vast majority, they get hooked in. And then I also massage the story based on their input. So not like things, oh, you should change this, but as they make guesses as to what's going on, or as they explore and discover something or if they start talking to each other, like I often separate them into teams. And then one team has a certain amount of knowledge, but that the other one doesn't have, and vice versa. So they start talking about each other, and they may come up with a really great idea that's better than the one I've got planned. And so I go and get it headed in the direction they want it to go. And then they go, hey, I was right, and then so they're very excited about that. So, but the whole thing for me is the story and the characters. It's very important that the characters are interesting enough, at least, to carry the story. And that hasn't always been true, even in the games and game plans. The characters in the Mandarin class are sort of just there, but they're also, you have to think about who your actors are and so on. Now, I do, obviously in the multiplayer classroom, I rarely have actors. It's basically just the students. But when they give me some money, then I get some actors.
Well, let's put this in context a bit, because obviously this is, I'm going to call it the second book, but obviously your first book has 2 editions. So the first book is all about multiplayer classrooms and is about why and how to do it. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So how does this second book, in your opinion, build on that or add to that first one?
Well, the first one were all my classes that I taught, and I don't teach math. I don't teach a whole bunch of things. I teach games. So and screenwriting, different things. So that's just me. And people have read the book, and I try to make it so I could apply that to any other class, and I include the case histories from different people who have done it with different classes. But I couldn't teach math to save my life. All right. So This book is an example of collaboration between me and a subject matter expert, or multiple subject matter experts. The escape room in a box set on the moon. When we went into the meeting, I went into the meeting and there was probably 20 people sitting around the table. And I don't want to tell them that we don't want 20 designers there, but gradually we try to get to the point where they understand. Oh, I've got a great idea. Hold on to it for a little while, right? So it's about how to apply what I'm doing in a multiplayer classroom in other people's areas of expertise. And I've been lucky enough to actually, have some budgets so that they're much more elaborate than my regular classrooms are. Obviously, I mean, we've got video, we've got live events. They are alternate reality games, and I would call the first book about my alternate reality games on a very small scale.
Okay. Well, I've got 2 questions immediately about this, but the first one I think is who are you hoping will read this book and the first book?
The first book has been, I've got I don't know, 1,600 people or so on the Facebook page and so on. And they're basically teachers that are not 80 years old, who are not locked into teaching, the same thing over and over again. Now I turn to page 28. But are interested in other ways to reach the students, because I think education is in real trouble. And one of the problems is that it seems to have been taken over by politics. It seems to have been taken over by theoretical stuff rather than focusing on the students. So I wanted to make sure that in the second one, they got a chance to see the potential, and also that's an excuse to talk about collaboration. And it's also a good time to, I'm going to lose the thought. Okay, I had another good one, but anyway.
It'll come back.
Yeah.
I mean, that's cool. Actually, that's exactly why I had a copy of the first book. I am part-time. I lecture at university. I teach gamification, and a colleague saw the book and bought it for me, saying you would appreciate this.
Good. Yeah, have them buy more and give them to your friends.
Exactly.
So that's one of the points of this. That's the audience. The audience is teachers who are not locked in yet, who recognize there must be a better way of doing this. A very simple example from that book is don't grade students down when they do badly. Grade them up when they do well. And that's called experience points. It's what we do. And so they're always adding on, and they can't fall back. I mean, EverQuest, when I first started playing it, you could lose a level if you died right after you made a level. And man, that sucked. They changed that for a reason, right? So same thing with this. So you've got, you got this many points on this. And I give them the whole, number of lessons and how many points for the lessons and everything in a document separate from the class and everything. So they know how they're progressing, but they're always going forward. And the other thing is, in games, we learn by dying. So we learn by failing, right? So allow them to fail, but then try again. I always allowed them to, do the same exams over again, for example. So that's, I could go on like this.
Yeah, no, I mean, to be honest, you're preaching to converted. I personally struggled to get the whole experience points design agreed by my university, shall we say. So I have to fit in around it in my own ways.
There is that issue. There's the suits, right? So you got to deal with them.
Yeah. Look, tell us about the format of this book then, because I found it very interesting and practical.
Okay.
You've talked about how they're collaborations. How does this book work?
Well, I start off with a little introduction. I allow the subject matter expert to give their side of it, and I just let them write whatever they wanted to, basically. So a couple of them said, well, this is how we put it all together. A couple more said, well, this is what we had to do, so I let that happen. And then I made sure that they understood that these are based on design documents that I've created. but they're not really design documents. They're designed for someone to read how the process went. How did we collaborate? How did we put it together? How did it change? And then how did it run? And then a coda at the end. And this happened. I mean, I couldn't believe the numbers of in the first one of this, which was a physical fitness game. The number of miles they ended up running in a 7-week period.
Oh, it was one of them like 242 miles, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, when you start to add it up over that period, you go, oh, that's not like, a marathon every day. So it does, but it's still, I went, wow. And they did that because they wanted to find out what was going to happen next, not because somebody said, get on that treadmill and slim down.
Yeah, the power of the story, bring it along. I'm going to come back to that.
Okay.
You said something earlier, and it mentions it in the book. You are justly proud that your own learning games cost no money to produce,
Right.
but these ones in this one have a budget. How much
Yeah.
difference does it make whether you can have a budget with building your game?
Well, I wanted to show that you could do it, and I say this over and over again, in a field with no tech. That doesn't seem to get Microsoft and Apple excited, right? But in this case, I wanted to show what you could do if you were a foundation, or if you wanted to do a grant, apply for a grant. I mean, one of the games is a NASA grant. One is a Robert Wood Johnson, which is a healthcare grant. Another one is not the National Institute
National
of Health,
Science Foundation.
Yeah, National Science Foundation. These are very, big grants. The cheaper ones were just seed money from the schools themselves, but they wanted to see if this was going to work. And so I wanted to say, look, this is something you could do. And also, I've been talking now to people who want to do it for 100,000 people online at a time. There's an interesting challenge. So I've been working on that too, but basically that's why the money is interesting. And also we got to do some really fun things. There's the shot of the flying saucer beaming somebody up in the one game. We've got dead bodies. All these things you probably aren't supposed to put into a classroom are in there because I write mysteries and and thrillers and things. So tough.
So reading between the lines there, you're using the budget to create special effects and things to make the whole thing more immersive, more convincing story?
Yes, and all because they are not all tied to a class. The first one was not tied to a class anymore. And so I got to give them reasons for, these are rewards where they find something and then they take a picture of themselves. And that, because in the story, allows them that picture to go up on a website or something. So they can go, hey, we did that kind of thing. And so we need we were using web designers for some of them, special effects people, use the Kinect. Remember the Kinect? It was okay. And really that was a little sleight of hand. We want to say, look, we can put tech into the classroom, but it wasn't the tech we were really talking about, but they didn't get that because they aren't gamers. I don't know if I wandered there or not. Sorry.
No, you were good to begin with. It's fine. Do you know what? These interviews, what's great is when we wander off and we something new will come out of it quite often. So the other thing about budgets I've noticed is you work with more people. Yeah. So you often work with other people in putting together the games.
Yes.
And so where there's a budget, what would you say the key roles and the key behaviors are needed for a successful game for learning?
Well, I think in this case, you mean with other people working on it too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It has to be. That's where the collaboration comes in. You have to make a dividing line and say, you're the subject matter expert. I'm the game designer. We have to respect each other's roles. And if they say, we need to teach this and it won't work the way you're doing it, I have to listen to that. And they have to listen when they've got something that is really boring. And I say, the students aren't going to go for this. Or else, well, here's a classic example from a game which is not in the book. I had somebody say, well, we'll have all these choices and they'll change the story. So you'll have 2 choices and that'll change it to 4 choices and then to 8 choices and 16 choices. And I this was in a phone call meeting, and I yelled at them over the phone, and I said, Chris Crawford calls that the tree of death, the branching tree of death, because it just keeps going like this, and you can never bring them all back in. So that's where the designer has to, and I admit that's when I probably got the angriest, because I said, no, you can't do that. But it's a balance between the two. I respect what they're trying to teach. They respect how I'm going about it. And there's always stuff that doesn't quite work out the way one side or the other wants it, but a good collaboration, you just continue and then you test.
Testing. That doesn't really appear in the book.
Well, it does. The testing is in how well we did, on how well we did. And
okay, so it's a live test.
Yes, it is. And then we know at the end, and we should say in the book that there are links to scholarly papers from the subject matter experts. I'm on a couple of them, but they did all the work on them, so that they get a chance to see, what academics get to see stuff that they like.
I like that. Now, one thing I noticed, right? This is a big, thick book. You've given us a lot of information about the story in each of the 4 games. So that's just 4 games in there. How much story do you need to create a successful ARG? Because sometimes I think just paragraphs, and then in here there's almost whole worlds. Where's the balance?
You have to create a whole world, and everything has to support the teaching and the story and everything else. Remember, these are not played over one day, or these are weekly things for quite a while. One of them I think was 12 weeks, one was 7 weeks, and so on. That you have to fill that with something. You can't just say, oh, try this again, or you have to make sure the story is moving forward, and you have to make sure there's enough story and enough puzzles and enough gameplay and surprises to fill each day of that week, not just each week. So you're talking about a lot of material, and that's why I often have a team with these, although I do the writing and the structuring. But we have to come up with things, and then we talk about, in the book I talk about how some of them went really wrong, or some of them went right, and so on. But that's why there's so much of it. There's a lot of time to fill. Think of, now we've got these miniseries right now in the last few years that come out all the time, that they're anywhere from 6 episodes to 10 episodes, somewhere in that comfort zone. And they need a lot of story too. Some of them don't do it as well as the others, right? But I love the noirish ones that have come out. I'm getting.
Do you think your experience in episodic writing really helps with learning games, particularly because we're used to them appearing over the weeks of a term or semester?
Yeah, I do. You have to carry. Now, some of them you didn't really carry over stuff, but in some, the characters have memories of earlier episodes that they're now part of their life, and those are the ones that are most interesting. If an episode of Charlie's Angels, then none of them are going to get shot, or if they do, they're going to be okay. Just a head wound, it's all right. So that continuity, and that really came out of me being the head writer on a daytime soap. And that went on. I had to write 500 pages a month. And I had to do that every day, have cliffhangers. Every day have something changed. So by the time I got to these games, I actually had an idea on how to do it. But that's why you end up with a whole bunch of stuff to fill that space so they don't go wandering off.
That's a great question, a great point. How much practice in writing the story do we as teachers or lecturers need? Or should we go and get one?
That book is for subject matter experts to go find the writer designer, and for writer designers to go find the subject matter experts. The worst games I've seen that try to teach are ones where somebody tried to do both, and they may have been really good at one of them, but the person who's good at, and I'm not, but the person who's good at both of them is real rare. And if they don't take that into account, and I spoke at the Irish conference on game-based learning a couple of weeks ago, and I asked one of the people who had designed this really boring game, who was your designer? Oh, I did it. I'm a designer too. And well, just calling yourself a designer, oh, you designed it, and I don't want to be mean. Yes, I do. So just calling yourself a designer doesn't make you one. There's actually a skill set and some talent involved. Same with writing.
I'm sure I remember a talk from Lee Sheldon that says, like, stage one is call yourself a game designer, and you are one. But yeah, needs practice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, my next question actually matches one from the audience at the moment as well, which is his question, Thorsten's question is, how do you create a story to fit a subject? And mine is, how close should the story you tell tie to the subject matter?
It's easiest that it ties as much as you can make it. The first game in the book is a physical fitness game. It was to give the students a reason for running all over campus rather than trying to force them to run on a treadmill. All right. So I had things called sprints. We did GPS events where they ran against each other, all within the story. You have to do this as part of the story, not because it's part of the class. In the Mandarin game, where they exceeded all our expectations, but I made sure that it's about a manuscript. It's about something written. You're going to go to China, because we always say that to learn a foreign language, what's the best way? Immerse go there. But we can't all do that. So I took them there without leaving the classroom. But that, I think I answered it. I'm afraid I'm going to go off on another story now, so I'm going to
Is this the peril of being a storyteller?
Yeah, it is.
You keep writing new
They're
threads.
all up here, and you see these are not earphones. These are story plugs. I'm trying to keep them from coming out of my head.
You were talking about the physical fitness game, so I'll bring it back to that one. This was the Skeleton Chase 2. So you talk about the first one in the first book. One of the things I noticed about this one was actually it wasn't directly linked to the weekly structure of the related class. Yeah, so we normally week in, week out, we do stuff. And I was wondering, what difference did it make not having that constraint of having to match the weekly class?
There was some competition between regular classes and this extracurricular activity, but we did have both extrinsic and intrinsic rewards and things to try to keep them moving through it. But it allowed us to concentrate on what we wanted to teach, as opposed to, I'm not going to say this right. They allowed us to actually concentrate on making them do it, as opposed to telling them what they should do and having the class time and counting calories and what all. So that's the main difference.
Well, I was wondering if there's a difference to do with pacing as well, because one of the issues I have, sometimes the story you feel needs things to happen a bit faster, but with the weekly episode.
Well, in that case, in the one where there was no, it was not attached to a class. We could go at our own pace. So when it came to final week or something like that, we could slow things down a little bit. When there isn't really anything on their own calendars and so on, then we can. And we had, and in that game, we had that. We had a week vacation right in the middle of the thing. So I had to give some really big clues that the stuff that was coming was going to be interesting, so they wouldn't forget. And then I was also very careful to provide in-game, in the story, ways where they could find out what they'd missed, because that's really important, actually, in both of them, but particularly in one that is not tied to a class where the teacher is going to be teaching stuff that they might have missed.
That's very important. I do remember there was a project in the Netherlands. They had an episodic soap, and there was a summer break every year when they didn't produce any episodes. And they actually did a game set in the same world over the summer break. Mm-hmm. And that kept the audience engaged. In fact, probably even more engaged than the series themselves. And then they were super keen when it restarted again.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes even a week's break in the schedule. We for instance last semester had like a 3-week break in the middle of the term because there was a mix of COVID related things, exam week, and I can't remember what the other week. There was like 3 weeks in a row, and you lose the momentum.
Yeah.
So having some stuff you can inject sounds really useful.
Well, imagine what I had to do when I was doing the soap opera, 5 days a week, weekend and win out, weekend win out.
Week in, week out. Yeah.
Thank you. Um, if I got hit by a bus, the show would have gone dark. Not from mourning,
Yeah.
from the fact that they had no more material to shoot. So you have to keep it going and revving it and reminding them, and each one, and you do it as sneakily as possible. You don't want to sit them down and say, no, this is what we don't want you to miss, like those little clips that they have at the beginning of a miniseries, right, to remind you of the last episode. And so all of that has to be taken into account so that you don't lose them, including things like there was another thing in that same game where it was World Run Day or something like that. And that it was in Brazil, I think. So we decided to tie into that. So I had to come up with this whole thing that allowed them to chase around town, getting a whole ton of steps in order to catch a guy which I couldn't let them catch. But they got free pizza at the end, so they didn't really care.
Oh, that's cool. That ties neatly into my next question. So you talk about using extrinsic and intrinsic rewards in the games, from publishing photos of the players doing stuff to receiving vouchers for pizza. How important are these rewards? Because sometimes I think like the reward is the narrative itself and learning a new bit. So how important are they? And then also, like, which rewards did you find most popular? These are students. Was it pizza or photos?
It varied. We had prizes in that one, that's the only one out of the four that occurred. And we did. It's a struggle. I dislike extrinsic rewards a lot. I would rather do it intrinsically, but in this case, my subject matter expert said these are students. We're going to have to do something else, and so we're going to feed them pizza. Or whatever. And
this was the health one, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Give them more pizza.
It was, but they were running it off. You're right. Yeah. But that's so the extrinsic rewards. I don't rule them out entirely. I just don't want the focus to be on that. I want the focus to be on the story and the characters, and and behind the scenes what they're learning.
Yeah, of course. And I guess actually the intrinsic stuff, like the photos of themselves, makes them feel more part of that game and that story, so they're going to be more involved.
It really works. And also, I published, and it's in the book. One student, there were two competing NPCs, right? The psychic and the celebrity reporter, and one of the students were deciding which one they were going to believe and which one they were going to help. And one student did almost the same thing to both of them, and to become a double agent. And I thought that was really cool. But that shows that they're into that part of the game too.
It does. And you can, I guess, that's the one you want to go and recruit as a teaching assistant the next time.
Yeah.
That's it. You mentioned briefly earlier that another game which was to teach Mandarin. So this game was called The Lost Manuscript.
Yeah.
And actually, I think my favorite element of this language teaching game was that you had to use your language skills to progress through the narrative of the game. So how hard was it to link the subject matter so closely to the game? I'm intrigued.
That was probably the hardest one, simply because the subject matter expert, the teacher who also played the teacher in the game, she said, this is the way you teach a language. These are the order you have to do things. And I couldn't match it exactly. So I had to come up with things like, for example, there's a get-together after the students arrive in Beijing, where not a whole lot happens plot-wise, but they learned all about how to order food. You kind of have to do that more than once, where you basically accept the fact that the subject matter expert says they need to learn about railroads now, and then
Yeah, I'm with you.
you have to
Yes.
deal with it.
Yeah, like and the game Duolingo. I don't know if you've ever played Duolingo to learn languages.
I've
They, they,
seen it.
One of the things that interests me about that one is they mess around with the language. So you might get taught the words, but they put them into nonsensical sentences sometimes. Like the ant is reading the newspaper. I remember learning in Portuguese.
Okay.
And so they've gone a different way about it. They've just made the words you learn in the right order, but just had fun with it.
Yeah.
In a nonsense way, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah.
So you had to approach it and like, well, now you're going to order food.
Yeah.
Actually, I think. Yeah, go on.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No.
Oh, well, but I wanted to say one of the things that emerged out of that was when one of my favorite stories is when they landed and they got through customs, and I had all these things set up around the room where they got to change their money and call the hotel and so on, had to connect up there, that they did it in half the time of the class. And I thought they'd just quit, but because something had gone wrong, they were supposed to be met by a professor, and all they found was the sign that said "Welcome, students." Right? They started questioning, getting out their phrase books because they're way past what they should be learning. Right? Do you know what happened to this guy? Did you see him? Anybody see you drop that? And thank God these people who are not actors, they were just from a nearby community center, the Chinese speakers, went with it. They stayed there and seriously discussed in Chinese with these students. They couldn't help them, right? But they stayed for the whole class, and then they had to stop. They had to be told, sorry, class time's up. I love that.
I like that. Yeah, in fact, it looks like one of the reasons that game was so effective at teaching was all the people playing those supporting characters only spoke the native language.
Yes.
So using the game, you've created an immersive experience like visiting the relevant country, China, without actually having to go there. I think this is amazing, by the way. That's definitely the way to learn a language, is immerse yourself. So do you think that same approach about the immersion can work with most subjects? Like I could see it with history easily, but what about chemistry or economics?
Well, I think you'd have to be careful with chemistry just off the top of my head. But I would think that economics, sure. I consulted on one, and there was another one that I consulted that was not economics, was something like it. But anyway, I think each one is a challenge. I've never done a chemistry game, but I know there's a way to do it. As long without getting them to blow themselves up or I guess I took a chemistry class once, but it's so you have to be careful when you're working around stuff that could be tricky, right? You want to see the volcano bubble over, but you don't want things to explode in people's faces. So I would have to think about what that story would be. Oh, it was statistics was the other one that so I did create a story for that where you come into a new job with a company, a statistical company who's doing statistics for this pharmaceutical company on testing on this new product that they're going to come out with. And you're going to discover that there's something wrong with it, and there's been somebody fudging the numbers and so on. But what did they do to me? Don't let subject matter experts touch the design button. There was a full library in this building you could walk around in, and they had copied the entire books to the ones on the shelves. And so you go in and you get a job interview and you get hired, and there's this mystery, and they say, okay, go into the library and read chapters 2 and 3.
They just took it back to normal.
And they did it, and that did not make it all the way to a full game. They didn't get their grant renewed. So see,
so there you've got people trying to deliver the old way in the game.
Yeah,
and now
you've seen that. You've seen I did a math game. I did do a math game. Where they basically, and by the time I was brought on, they already had this thing. This person you're going to talk to first solve this problem, and it would show up on the screen, and it would look exactly, you know, like X plus 9, you know, that crap. And it was too late. But I did manage to find a way to soften it a little bit. But sometimes if you're brought in too late, they're not going to start from scratch again. You're sort of stuck.
There is a moral to that story. Bring the game designer in early, definitely.
Yeah, bring them both in together and make sure they understand. Because I've been on projects where, like the one with the branching tree of death, the branching project of death. Although that one got made.
Okay, so enough budget, you still get all the branches, yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
So you talked about the books being copied and put in there. So one of your projects in this game was designed purely as an online delivered class.
Right.
And in the book, you say it gave you unprecedented control over the experience. And I'm wondering, well, what difference does it make?
Well, it allowed me to do a couple of different things. One, I didn't have to worry about the physicality of the game. The technology at that time, at that particular school, Excelsior, was that you, for the class, we asked you to upload an avatar, which we do in classes, you know, in games often. So they would either an avatar or their picture. They could do either one. So they uploaded, but none of them, they were all offline. They never met physically. And so, you know what I'm going to say? I took 2 of them, and they weren't real students. They were run by TAs, and they were there for 2 reasons. One, to take different sides in a debate, and 2, to keep that story moving and ask the questions necessary so that the students would move through it. And nobody, except for the one guy, I won't go into the side story with the programmer, but everybody accepted them as students, and until a certain point in the game where they realized that there's something else going on here. But at that, they were so wrapped up in it, they wanted to see what was going to happen next, so they went with it.
I like that. They didn't feel too betrayed by you.
No, I thought they would be. As a matter of fact, then I got even worse when I had that class had their website messed up by the bad guys. But then I get to the last one, the cybersecurity game, and the bad guy erases all their grades. It's all gone because we set up a school server that wasn't right, and we copied them over, and they watched as their grades were just dissolved and everything went dark, and that made them think. That was
made some of them happy and some unhappy, I bet.
Yeah, I get it. But nobody, except for the one kid at the beginning who missed the orientation, thought it was real. But it still gets us, just like when we're watching a movie and I know it's not real, that he's not really going to sink his fangs into her neck. But
that's the beauty of an immersive story, isn't it? The oxytocin is released in our brain and we feel like we're in it.
Yeah.
So what happens to the character does happen to us. At least there is some physiological link to that. That's one of the reasons I like story and teaching so much, is because we're more likely to remember it as well because we experienced it.
Right.
Yeah. Look, that particular game was designed for online. It's the only one that was completely designed for online in the book. But you completed this book and released it during this horrific COVID pandemic time. I guess I'm going to say, does delivering a remote, purely online game work? Does it work better? Does it, is it something we should be aiming for?
I don't think it's necessarily better. I think it's better depending upon where your students are located. If they can all get to school, that's fine, but not all schools, particularly when you get on the college level and everything. Do they have to move to the city where the school is? I think that there is we have lots of schools now who use online teaching, who did even before COVID, to supplement the in-class experience. And they say there's no substitute for the in-class experience. I think if they did, what they're doing is somebody with a green screen behind them, right, going, now we're going to talk about the Hittites. Well, great. That's really not as exciting as even being in the classroom, where at least I can look out the window. So, but I think that there is a definite place for them if they try some different things with them. Because my colleagues were, I showed them what we had done in this game. And they all went, wow, wow, wow. And they all went right back to, now we're going to talk about the Hittites.
Yeah.
It was just, there was no, that just went right over them.
See, I've seen that as well. So what do you think the future is like for teaching, particularly in higher education? Like, and what does it look like if we don't use games? Is it, you know, are we missing a trick? Is there another way to do it, or is it?
I think there are other ways to do it. I think the problem is we seem to have solidified into a certain way of thinking teaching should be done. And in the first book, I talk about the fact that Plato mentions the Egyptians who were using a math game to teach math, and so on, and John Locke also talked about how you could use games, and those, you know, we're talking about a few centuries ago, but I don't see any reason why a really charismatic teacher, I think all had them, we're lucky enough to have that, and somebody who's just so excited by the material. I mean, I think as simple as that could be enough to keep kids interested. Somebody who's very nurturing, but I think you have to make sure that the teacher is alive in the experience, as opposed to just doing it by rote. I mean, the people who don't like this that I run across in academia are the people who have been teaching the same playbook, the same stuff in the same way for decades, or even a few years. Well, it works. I don't have to worry about it. I don't get paid that much anyway. I'm just going to do it this way. And if I think if there's somebody who's charismatic or is caring enough, they could probably get away with that, but not everybody.
Yeah, some people are just good at that. I mean, I was particularly worried myself because I teach gamification, and every other class, they were there in person live playing a particular game to understand a concept. You know, a physical one as well, quite often, like Jenga or Lego. And so taking it online gave me some real like heart palpitations about how engaged my students would be this time.
How'd it work?
I redesigned the whole course to deliver it in a flipped method where they were basically presenting back to me every week their understandings, their results of playing games. They were going out and finding stuff, and it was, in essence, there was no narrative for this one, okay, but they were just learning the concepts. It worked really well, and I would say we have better results, funnily enough.
I think that you always have to worry about the kids who don't plug in as well as everybody, even the average kids, and I think that is exacerbated by online right now, because it's really easy for them to sit there and down here in the other hand, you know, they're playing Pokemon or something, if they are playing a game, or if they're just vaguing out. That, I mean,
it's interesting, isn't it? I thought of it in terms of challenges and quests. So every week of a 20-week course, there was at least an individual challenge where they could see and engage with other people's individual stuff, and a group challenge, which was obviously generally harder. They needed to work together on that one.
That's important because you're bringing them in to other human beings and so on. And I'm not suggesting this for everything, but the fact that you can have a couple of students who aren't, as long as it's in a story or something, you don't want to make them feel cheated or anything. Why does he always get A's? You know, you have to be careful. So.
Do you know what? I think the biggest single difference for me was by pre-preparing all the content and delivering it as videos and games and other things. When we actually had online meetings and seminars, I was just giving feedback non-stop to what they were telling me. So they got far more feedback than they would in a normal class.
Cool.
And I think that's one of the takeaways I took from it.
Yeah.
But we've digressed. Cool. I wanted to talk about your stuff. Yeah. So where were we? We were talking about COVID, remote teaching. I think there's a place for it because I found it a bit more inclusive for some of my students, and they were all around the place. What do you think the future's like? And this matches a question from the audience as well. What's the future of gamification in the scope of general education, whether lower and higher? Could gamification ever replace the live classroom interaction, or does it need to be a
I mean, online?
Yeah, I think that's what they're saying. Yeah.
I think it's never as good as having everybody in a room together. But I also think that for student opportunities, students who want to go to a school, say that's better than the school that's down the street or something, and they could choose to go online or something like that, and that would mean more work for the teachers. But I think that just like colleges allow students from all over the world to come and learn there, or I think they also, because they knew they were going to be away and are going to be at home now, can actually, it's probably easier on them. They want to, they want to go to do the travel, everything, but they're at home where they know everything. And I think it might be for kids that are not as socialized as other kids, gives them a chance to, if we do it correctly, is the way you were talking about, it draws them into groups. I talk about in the first book about the exam where out of 50 questions, 10 can be and they're in teams of like 4 people. 10 can be answered by any one person in the team, and they all get credit for it. And boy, did I get a lot of pushback on that. And I said, let's just try it. Let's just see what happens. And what happened is I think I say something like, it wasn't just the kid in the glasses who solved all the problems. It was that somebody got one right. There were high fives, there were hugs, and they wanted that intrinsic reward. So they worked harder in order to get some of those right. And so it was like the reverse of what the naysayers were talking about.
That's yeah, I remember that example. It's very cool. There's another question that kind of follows on from the online one, which is from Thorsten. Speaking of tech, what potential do you see with augmented reality with regard to the concept of the multiplayer classroom?
I'm not a big fan of augmented reality. I may not be the one person to answer this question. I need something more immersive than that. Whether it's reality or a good immersive game. And augmented reality, you can take you and show you. I advised a group that had a museum. They wanted to do the museum tour in a more interesting way. So we had actors in costumes and things from the past and so on. And that seemed to be kind of interesting. There was no attempt to translate that into any kind of story or anything. They basically just said, well, I lived here and this happened, and then I went over there and that happened. But at least it was a different way of doing it. I don't think augmented reality is a biggie for me.
Actually, I had a friend who ran an augmented reality company, and they did a marketing campaign for one of the zombie films. And the game on the app, if you just turn the camera on with it on, wherever you pointed it, there were zombies coming at you.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to run or fight or whatever. And that strikes me as a way you could use it. Historical characters coming at you. Suddenly you're in the middle of a battle and you're seeing it over the classroom or wherever you are. I think it's a lot of effort.
You could do it online. One of the things which my son, who's a producer in Hollywood, and I came up with an idea which we never followed through on because COVID hadn't hit yet, but was an idea where these people are on a spaceship. There's 8 or 10 of them, and something happens, so they're all locked down in their particular places, and they have to solve the issues, just seeing each other on the screen, but yet they're being murdered one at a time, but impossibly because there's no air out there. What's going on? That kind of thing. So I think there are stories that you can come up with that would make that work pretty well.
That's pretty cool. I'm going to digress a bit from the book and find out a bit more about you in the last few minutes. So we've talked about COVID and lockdown. How would you say it's affected your work and your day-to-day life? And have you found yourself gamifying anything? Your own habits, other things?
No, that's a silly idea. I was very lucky. What did I do? I wrote these. It allowed me to. I had promised my publisher 3 books in a certain time frame, and I'm always working on a game or two beyond teaching, and this just made it a lot easier. And I'm an only child, so I'm perfectly happy being on my own. My wife will tell you that that's true. But I've been very lucky. I'm also in a spot of the country which is probably has the most inoculations of any place in the country. That's in Massachusetts, and I'm not just in Massachusetts. I'm in the mountains of Massachusetts on the western side of the state, and we hit 70% months and months ago, and so I don't need to go out to a restaurant all the time. I don't need to go to the bars. I'm fine,
Making games.
playing with my Switch. I do have a Switch.
Oh, you see, that was my next question, right? So what games do you play? What are you enjoying the most?
I like big RPGs with stories. So for me on the Switch, although the Switch, there's been a number of ports over, I think Breath of the Wild is the one. And I'd have to look and see what other ones are on there, because I haven't played with it since I have been writing the third book, because I'm actually behind on that. That was supposed to be done.
What's the
Breath of the third book is the third edition of character development and storytelling for games.
To complete the set, that's what everyone who's listening needs to get as well. So when you're playing these RPGs and things, you're obviously enjoying it. How much do you draw upon those games in your game design?
Well, I think every time I see something in a movie or play it in a game or something, I'm always thinking of how I might, I don't think they did that, or boy, that might work as this. I mean, I'm watching it with two different eyes. I can be immersed and I can jump when there's a jump scare, but I also am watching how they do it. Some of them, it's a little bit more obvious, that they do this and now, it's 15 minutes in, car chase, that kind of thing. But so that's why I like the longer games with more story, the better. The Last of Us and so on is an obvious example. But the last one that I did do that was a big game was Breath of the Wild. All my students were talking about it, and it's already like 3 or 4 years old. So I thought maybe it's time to actually play this.
The peril of teaching games or gamification is your students are always telling you about games, and you want to play them. And you've got to find the time to do it.
And in this case, in the third book, I use lots of examples, but they're not interested in examples from all way back 5 years ago.
You got to update it.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing mostly. Is like, Mindscape tried story mode, but it didn't work. Here, they went out of business. It's that kind of thing.
I've got one final question for you, which is actually, is there a game type or a genre of game that you'd love to use in your work that you've not yet had a chance to do?
I don't think I have any favorites right now. I'm interested in the next project that someone comes and says, "Can you make a game from this?" So that we can teach it. I think that probably I mean, even the math game. I hate math, but even the math game, I had fun with the characters and the storytelling and stuff that I was able to bring to it. But I don't think I have. I'm going to disappoint, but I don't think I have a fave.
I think that's fine. You've created so many games, you've probably had a chance to do all the ones you wanted to do.
Oh, I hope not. I hope I'll come up with
I meant the types, the styles.
I like stuff with, I am a mystery writer in all the genres that I work in. So I like mysteries.
Okay, so that would be your tied together theme.
Yeah, look, most of the time.
This has been a brilliant interview. Thank you so much for all your great answers and being informative, and for answering some of the questions from the audience.
Thank you.
I've found it thoroughly interesting, and I can see how I'm going to tweak my own course, and I hope anyone else watching or listening to this will be doing the same, and obviously getting a copy. Where's the best place to get a copy of your books?
At better bookstores everywhere. Actually, probably not. Online is the way to get them. And I apologize in advance. This is a new publisher, Taylor and Francis, CRC Press, and they charge way too much for these books. I just looked at it and went, because they're a textbook publisher usually, and they're treating
So
them like
coming out with
textbooks, and textbooks cost more.
I think, right, that in my opinion, if you're about to build a game for learning something, whether this is $40, $50, $100, it's priceless because of how much informative examples there are, and to see what the work is. If nothing else, it'll help you work out who should be on your team to make it successful. So, you know, that's you've got to compare the cost, I guess, to consulting with you, in which case it's
a lot cheaper. You're right.
Yeah. Brilliant. And look, are you happy for people to get in touch with you? What's the best way? Email, Twitter, LinkedIn? Got a website that you want?
I don't have a working website, as you've discovered. I'm on Facebook. I have there's a multiplayer classroom page, and also, I mean, my email. So.
Perfect. Then I'll try and share some of that with the recording when we put it up.
Okay, cool.
Thank you so much again, and
okay, Pete.
A round of applause from everyone for you. Fantastic. And I'm going to stop recording.
Okay, thanks.